Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Roaring Readers section of the Manestream podcast. And today I am very excited to talk about the third edition of the Roaring Readers catalog, Watchmen. And this is a story that I am very passionate about because I am a very big Watchmen fan. I've been a fan for, I want to say, a few years now. I think at least since 2018, because that was when I first became aware of Watchmen. Because first I watched the movie before I read the comic, and I like the movie. I know a lot of people don't really like the movie as much as the book, and I get why, because I enjoy the comic a whole lot more, mainly just because of books don't have a runtime. Like, and when it comes to Watchmen, like the people who made the movie, they did a lot to try and capture the overall feeling of reading the actual comic by having, I think there's three versions of the actual movie. There's the theatrical version, which most people have seen, where it's basically the skeleton of the main story, but just with a lot of details, like extra background on characters, taking out extra scenes. And then there's the director's cut, which has more scenes of like character backgrounds, like specifically they include Hollis Mason, who's one of the Golden Age heroes from the 1930s and the 50s. And in the theatrical version, he's not that involved in the story. He's only in, I want to say, a few minutes of it. Like, he's only in one scene as an old man. He's actually, I'll be nice, he's in two. He's in the primary story, and a younger version who doesn't say anything is in a flashback, and that's all we get of him. And having him along with the other Golden Age heroes works as a parallel, but I'm getting off track. So, which should give you an impression of how into the story I am. I chose to do Watchmen because it's probably, at the moment, one of my favorite stories. I'll say for the moment it's my favorite, because I can't think of anything else. And part of that is because of like the visual details of the story. And this is one reason I like comics, because in them can't really see that well, but in the pages they do a great job at leaving small details that on a first run through you might not pay attention to. Like on a first go around, you're probably just looking at the dialogue, or at like major characters, like people who are talking, or people who grab your attention more readily. But that's something I like, because I'm a visual person. Like, I'm a literary guy, but my mind processes images like quicker, and I don't know what that's a result of, but that's how I am. So like when I read stories, like, and there's like a lot of descriptions, like very vivid descriptions, I usually play them out as like scenes in a film, or scenes like in a comic. And the people who made the theatrical film, it's basically like they used the comic as basically like a storyboard. I forgot the word. A storyboard for the movie. Like there are some scenes that are just shot for shot from certain chapters of the book. Like I want to say chapter 5 of the book where Dr. Manhattan first gets his powers. Like it happens slower. Like it's more visually like quick in the movie, but it's basically shot for shot of him being disintegrated. And I really like that as a guy who likes very vivid descriptions of worlds. I appreciate that. So that's enough on why I chose it. Let's actually get into the nitty gritty of what this book is all about. I'll start with, well, I've kind of shown you already the artwork and the panel layout specifically, because the panel layout, well, this is a good example. The layout of the pages kind of repeat each other, like the same, like on one page you'll have purple, gold, purple, and on the next page like the color pattern will repeat itself. And there's a reason, like a more, not subliminal, but like a more symbolic reason for why that is, that I'll get to later. But that's something I like about I didn't really notice it like on the first go around, like I said earlier. But another part of the panel layout is that it's 9 panels. Like 98% of this book has like the 9 panel layout, which allows like, so this book was written by Alan Moore and drawn by Dave Gibbons. And one reason they gave for doing the layout the way they did is because it allows for more imagery to be added. And they were inspired by Steve Ditko, who was, some say, the sole creator of Spider-Man. Some say it was Steve and Stan Lee, but some people will say it was more Steve Ditko, and that's a subject for another time. But they were inspired by Steve's layouts, because in the Spider-Man, or the ones that he drew, they used the 9-panel layout to use like very visually captivating images. And Alan Moore is a big Steve Ditko fan. Like I watch interviews where he is very inspired by the storytelling and the artwork as well. So, and there are a few pages where you'll have 6 panels, and then the bottom, which will have been it'll just be like a full-on section of itself. Like, as an example, in chapter 2, like this, in here, the page is what usually would be 9 panels would be this is dedicated by just one big one, just to take in the scope of the room, the scope of the scene. And I like that not all of the, because it depends on what you're trying to get across to the audience. Like for a scene like that, or like another scene that I was trying to get to where Rorschach is walking down an alleyway, and it's like there's posters on the fence, or not the fence, the wall, and it's him just walking, but there's so much detail in the colors. That's another part that I like about the comic. I like the colors. They're very captivating. And something that I kind of alluded to earlier is the symbolism in the story. I think if you've looked at the book just like in passing, or like you've probably read it before, or not, or if you're not like a huge fan, you probably remember the smiley face button at the beginning of the story, which is the comedians button. And I was watching an interview today where Alan and Dave give an explanation for why they use the smiley face with the blood drop, and Dave described the smiley face as being like a very cartoony image, and like in relation to superheroes, like they're very fantastical. Like it's a very fantastic concept to have the various things that superheroes do, and to add the blood drop as like a more realistic sign. It's like something like superheroes are very utopic, and sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But to have something like a crack in the wall, kind of like a solid wall, but just having that one little sign of something not being all that it seems. And it's a repeating symbol. Like it comes. Sometimes it's obvious, like in the first page of the book, where it's literally the smiley face, like on the sidewalk, or people like pulling it in their hands, or later on at the very end. Oh, and this is, if you haven't caught on, this is a spoiler filled discussion, because I cannot talk about the story any other way, giving it justice. At the end, when Rorschach's journal is leaked to the, I forget the publisher, I want to say New York Times, but it gets leaked to the press, and the mail boy, Seymour, he drips, I think, ketchup from a burger onto his smiley shirt, and that's like, some things like that just stick out as obvious, but there's others, like in this world, it's set in 1985, but it's a very alternate reality of 1985, where it's very futuristic, not like Star Wars futuristic, but like, take if Tesla or something like that, like electric cars were the majority of what people use. Like there's like we have fire hydrants on like sidewalks. There's basically that for electric cars. Like they're all over the place. Like gas powered cars are obsolete. Gas powered vehicles as a whole are obsolete. So that sort of thing. But on the fire hydrants, like the plug-in, like on a wall, like a charger on a wall, has like the two lines that kind of look like a shocked face. They kind of make a smiley face, and the book. So that's one symbol. Another one is the use of a clock, where there is 12 chapters in Watchmen as a whole, and each chapter, like, there's a clock on the side, and each passing minute, or hour rather, the hands move closer to, I'm going the wrong direction, but they move closer to 12. And the closer they get to 12, the more blood runs down the clock. And so time is a very, probably bigger than the smiley face, even though that's probably the most like visual symbol. The time in the story is represented in Dr. Manhattan, who has his time totally distorted by the accident that gave him these metaphysical powers, to put it mildly. Like, he can not do anything, but do almost anything. Like, he's responsible for making technology more advanced than it is now, because he accelerated, like, lithium production for batteries, like the lithium ion batteries for electric vehicles. And that's one thing that Alan and Dave really wanted to do with the story. They wanted to, because most superhero stories don't really, like, they don't really have that big of an effect on the world around them. Like, they exist, they can do things that pretty much none of us can, but they don't really have an effect on the way we view politics, like social culture, like technology or that sort of thing. But in here they do, because another thing that makes this world very different from our world is in the 60s, where in the 50s, Dr. Manhattan arrives, and he accelerates technology further than it did in the actual 50s. And in the 60s, the comedian, who is another, I'm gonna lay out the characters just as I go, but he is implied, but is kind of made obvious that he killed JFK in this reality. And in the 70s, I think in 1971, America wins the Vietnam War, and, like, because Dr. Manhattan and the comedian are the only supers who are allowed to operate, because in the 70s there was a ban on superheroes. They become outlawed, and they're the only two who are allowed to operate are those two. So the American government sends them to Vietnam, and mainly because of Dr. Manhattan, the North Vietnamese surrender, and it eventually becomes the 51st state of America. I think I don't remember what page in the book or what pages, but I remember a bit in the movie where they have the 51st state, like, type of graffiti. And I know, I think if you look on a flag, like, there's an extra star put on it to represent Vietnam. And also, Watergate never happened, so Nixon's uh, reputation was not as sour as it is or was at the time. And he, or not he single handedly, but the government repealed term limits. So Nixon is still the president in the 80s. So those are a few examples of how the world is very different from ours. And since I'm talking a lot about the characters, I'll get to them. Uh, and they represent a variety of different things, a variety of different beliefs. Uh, the first one that we'll get to, or the one that we get to in the comic, is Rorschach, who is a fan favorite for better or for worse. I think in the eyes of Alan Moore for worse, because there are some people who are very, like, when they see Rorschach, he is their guy. Like, he is how justice should be dealt out. Like, he has a very absolute view of morality, and Rorschach, to sell that visually, his mask is a Rorschach mask. And the reason that he uses the mask or enjoys it so much is because the whites don't mix with the blacks. Like, they never create shades of gray. They always stay clear and obvious. Like, and it's always, the mask is always moving. Like, it's moving for some reason they give, but I don't know off the top of my head. So he has a black and white view of morality. Like, criminals should never go unpunished. Like, and they should be punished as harshly as a human can be punished. And the majority of the time, that usually means death, essentially, or like extreme violence. And Alan Moore intended this to be a critique on that sort of objective, absolute view of morality. Like, everyone, to some extent, or not to some extent, I'll say that everyone feels their morality is objective. Like, they have a code. Like, even if it's not like put on paper, they have a code. And with some exceptions, they're pretty different from each other. And Moore wanted to critique the idea that justice is easy to define, like, all the time. Like, he wanted to critique, like, this very far right, like, thinking, like this authoritarian view of, like, dealing with, like, social ills. Like, it should be done with blunt force, like a strong man, to basically be the thing that solves all of your problems. And he's very I read a quote that he's very creeped out by people who are huge fans of Rorschach. And, like, at panels or like at cons, he'll be like, "That's cool," and he'll slowly back away because they missed the point entirely. Which isn't new to this character or Watchmen. There's a trend where people take a character that was meant to be a critique on a very impractical view of seeing the world, but they take it mainly because I think we're kind of conditioned to see the main character of a given piece as the like focal point of our Like, they are how we should see the world, and that is not always what people intend, but I think the way people view entertainment is subjective as well. On the other side of him, you have, and I'll go to two other characters, Laurie Jupiter and Dan Dryberg. I'll talk about them together because they have similar themes. Dan is the second Night Owl. Well, they're both the second version of a character. He's the second Night Owl, and Laurie is the second Silk Spectre. She was given the role by her mother, by pretty much by force, like a parent wanting their child to do the same thing that they did, and they're just gonna have to deal with it. She did it out of obligation, and Dan became Night Owl because he had the money to do it, and being Night Owl gave him purpose. Like, it made him feel special and not impotent, which is something that he deals with. Like, they both struggle with value, like self-worth, I'll say, because Laurie at the time, like at the start of the book, is in a relationship with Dr. Manhattan, but because of how he views the world, like, everything is determined. Like, there are no miracles, there are no there's low value to human life in his eyes, and that's not very comforting to a significant other. So she finds comfort elsewhere with Dan, because Dan is very, I don't want to say milquetoast, but he's very normal, relatively. And Dan struggles with self-worth because without being a superhero, he has very little personal purpose, or he feels he has very little personal purpose. And that's their main struggle in the story. I won't give everything away for the sake of time, but that's the main thing that they struggle with. The second to last character I'll get to, there's a lot, but I don't have a ton of time. The comedian is depraved, to put it mildly. He does whatever, I won't say what, but it's grim. And he does it because he feels that he can. Like, in his eyes, if you can do it, then you can do it. Or if you can get away with it, you can do it. Which, depending on what you want to do, is very grim. And it's a different type of nihilism than Dr. Manhattan, because Dr. Manhattan just kind of unsubscribes from interacting with humans. Like, halfway into the story, I think chapter 5 or 6, he goes to Mars because he doesn't see the value in being around human beings anymore. Like, he says he's tired of the constant human existence, to put it mildly. And let's see. Before the story happens, the comedian, I won't say has an epiphany, but like before the events of the story, he breaks down because he feels that life is a joke. Uh, Mainly because he doesn't see. Like I feel like I don't like giving him too much credit, but he wants to see life as significant, but he just doesn't. I won't say this absolves him of everything he does, but it's some glimpse into his psyche. And the other character that I'll get to, who has a very big role at the end, especially, is Ozymandias, he starts out at the story as a benevolent philanthropist. He was a former superhero in the 50s through the 70s up until the Keene Act. That's the name of the act that uh, bans vigilantes. He retired before that and became an industrialist. So, and he's a very, like, visually a very bright character. He's very inviting. You wouldn't expect ill will towards him until the end, where he's revealed to be the primary antagonist, like the main orchestrator of everything that's happened. He's responsible for the comedian's death at the start of the story because the comedian uncovered a part of Adrian Veidt, that's Ozymandias' alter ego. He uncovered a part of his plan before the story started, and to keep it under wraps, he threw him out of his apartment window. And that's very, in the movie, that's very shot for shot also. But the overall plan is to trick the world into stopping the Cold War by sending an alien creature to wreak havoc in New York, to unite the world into a utopia. Again, to put it mildly. Dan and Rorschach and Laurie uncover this by the end, but they don't stop it. Like, I want to say 10 million people in New York are killed, and the world is shocked by this, and they do unite to become a utopia. And this is different. Something about Veidt in this story in comparison to most other characters who have these type of plots. Like, the story doesn't totally condemn his actions as, like, undeniably wrong. Like, it kind of leaves it to your interpretation as to whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Rorschach does not see it as a good thing, and he decides to walk out and reveal the truth, regardless of whether or not it would undo the utopia. Manhattan stops him before he can, and Rorschach realizes that he probably won't walk out of that alive, but he sticks to his guns, and that's the one thing that I find very relatable, or not relatable, like compelling, I'll say. It's like how close he sticks to his beliefs, even though I have the opposite set of beliefs. It's compelling to see someone hold their convictions that far. And I think this leads to uh, like this whole plot leads to, I think, one of the questions about Watchmen as a whole, like who has, it's like a question on power, like who deserves power, why should they have power, why should they have the authority to enforce their will on other people simply by virtue of having power. So that's one of the overarching themes of Watchmen. And if you couldn't tell by me kind of skipping over a lot of things in this book, it's because it is massive. There are a lot of things I did not talk about. Uh, if you're here on campus, I'm pretty sure that there's a version, not a version, a copy in the library on the second floor, uh, where they have comics and graphic novels. So if you're interested in reading that story, I highly recommend because it is excellent. And I think that's a good stopping point. I could keep going on if we ever transition into doing hour-long podcasts, but not at the moment. So until next time, I'll see you around.